Hey guys, welcome to Not So Basic Things. Thank you for joining me today in the bathroom. The reason that we're in the bathroom is because we need to replace this faucet. So I've got a new one and I will show you exactly how to do it. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to turn the water off. So there's one and there's two. All right, next thing we're going to do here is we're going to take these hoses off of the valve. You're going to want to put a towel or a bucket or something down because you will probably lose a little bit of water when you do this. They do sell a tool, by the way, that will hold on to these valves so that you can tighten up the fitting. I will see if I can link to that tool in the video description. Once you get the tubes disconnected, we're going to disconnect the hardware that's holding the faucet in there. Maybe a little bit difficult to see, but we're talking about this guy up there. Basically, these are the clamps that hold the faucet in place. Also, you'll notice that the drain stop here, that needs to be removed as well. We've got everything loose, so we should be able to just lift that right out of there. There we go. So, that's what we've got. Pretty gross under there. We'll definitely get that cleaned up. Now you notice again, if we look at the this nastiness here, this is a 3-hole configuration. So when you buy your new faucet, you want to make sure that it is compatible with a 3-hole configuration. The faucet that we're going to replace this with works with a 3-hole and a 1-hole. So you can see we've only got the single post there, but it's got this cover that we're going to put on that will cover up those other 2 holes that we're not going to use. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're shopping for a new faucet. So when you're doing this, you're likely to encounter this situation where you get mineral deposits and soap scum and just yuck underneath the old faucet. This is a green Brillo pad. It's made by 3M. And these work really, really well, especially on like a ceramic porcelain type sink. You spray, in this case, I use something called Simple Green and a little bit of elbow grease and it'll clean right up. If you're using a sponge or a towel or something, you will not get that up. You're gonna need something a little more abrasive. I wanna point out, this is not the same thing as steel wool. So if you've got steel wool under the sink and you go, we'll just use that, probably not a good idea. Okay, so there is something else that I need to point out that is a difference here. The water stop. This one doesn't have that. So the way it works is it's got one of these that's a push button, which honestly, I like this. I think this is gonna work better for us, but that means that we've gotta get into the drain. With this being a pedestal sink, and the pedestal portion not coming out unless I actually take the sink off the wall, which I'm not a fan of doing. There's not a lot of room back there. So just bear that in mind. If you don't want to deal with this, just make sure you get the same style design water stopper so that you wouldn't have to mess with this part. And then all you have to replace is the faucet itself. So food for thought. The other thing that's worth mentioning here is you want to put something on these rubber gaskets when you put these in here. Now there is something called plumber's putty, and plumber's putty works great. It's used for when you put, drains and showers and that sort of thing. You don't want to use plumber's putty on anything that's got plastic because over time it will deteriorate the plastic. So we're going to be using something called Super Lube. It's a Teflon based, non-petroleum, very important. That's just going to lubricate these O-rings or this rubber just a little bit and help them to seal. But again, you do not want to use a petroleum-based product on these type of gaskets anywhere there's plastics. Very important. So we've got some caulk around the wall here. I'm using a razor blade. I'm going to cut that. We don't just want to try to pull it off of there. It will damage the drywall. So I'm going to cut the caulk all the way around. The sink will just lift up if I have to. There is a bracket that is holding the sink on there. If I have to, I can loosen those screws just a little bit, but it's basically just sitting on top of it, so I shouldn't have to, but... All right, so this is what you call a good news, bad news situation. Good news is you can see what I'm doing. Bad news is this had to come off the wall. Here we've got the mechanism that actually stops the flow of water, brings the plunger down and blocks the sink. And as I said, this sink, this new faucet uses a different mechanism. So the part that we're replacing is basically this right here. Okay, I'm going to start by removing this guy, and this is going to be different, or maybe not. It just kind of depends on your application. So we're taking these parts out, okay, setting that aside, and okay. Now I can take this nut off, which will allow me to take this piece off that we don't need. Okay, so we've got that piece out of there. I also did something I should have done earlier, which is put gloves on. Okay, our new piece here, if I can turn this is going to go down through here, okay? And again, that thin rubber washer is going to seal up against the porcelain there. So similar to like we did up here, we want to clean this really well, get whatever built up yuck there might be on there. We want to get it off because we want to make sure that we get a really, really good seal and that we don't have any leaks. It's kind of like they say when you're painting, the prep is the hardest part, but it's the most important. Okay, something else that we're going to have to do once we get this part mounted and all buttoned down and stuff is we're probably going to have to cut this. They generally come longer than what you need it to be. So this piece is going to drop down into our trap. It's going to go like this, okay? And there's the fitting on here that's going to tighten this up and make a watertight connection. But we don't know what that length is yet, and so we'll just put this all together. We'll move the pedestal out of the way and drop the sink down and make a mark on this, and then we'll cut it, and that'll be that. Okay, so we're ready. So I mentioned earlier that you want to use a lubricant, so Super Lube. That's what we're using. So multi-purpose synthetic grease. It is non-petroleum, and it's not going to cause the rubber or the plastic to break down over time. I've used this for 20 years probably, and it's really good stuff. So I'm not putting a lot on here. I'm just putting a thin coat on that O-ring. In fact, it's not an O-ring, it's a rubber washer. In fact, I'm gonna do both sides just because it will help it to seal. It'll help keep this washer moist and lubricated. So I'm just going to slide that in here, and then we've got this piece that goes on the bottom, and I'm going to do the same. I'm just going to put a little bit on this washer. There we go. Okay, so that's starting to snug up a bit. It doesn't need to be super duper tight, but just snug. Okay. So that's probably good enough. Not only that, but it is plastic, and so if you get it too tight, we could break it, and you don't want to do that. So you can see the fitting that's coming out of the wall here. I've shoved a dirty sponge in the hole because otherwise we get sewer gases coming back out of this, which, as you can imagine, stinks. Not only that, but it's probably not the best thing to be breathing. I'm going to pull this out briefly. Put this back on. Okay, this part here also, will go in and out of the wall, so we need to set that distance. I'm just going to snug this up. I'm not tightening it, but that way it'll still move. Everything will still move a little bit. Okay, we're ready to test fit this now. We'll be careful to line up the downspout with the trap here. And so I'm not actually going to have to cut this, which is great. There's enough space in here to accept what's there. So we are good to go. This is a good opportunity. We can snug these up now that everything's, or I should say, check that everything is in position and that we're not, putting undue stress or load on this because something's not turned correctly, and then we can snug these up. So we can take this back off. Now we've got the old washer and nut. These can be replaced, but it's actually still in good shape. The rubber is still pliable. It's not dried up or anything. So no concerns there. But I'm also, just to be on the safe side, we'll put a little bit of our super lube on here to help it seal. It's also a good opportunity to grab your razor blade and come around and clean up all of the old caulk on the side of the bowl here, and cut off on the wall. Be careful not to remove drywall and so forth, because when we get done here, you want it to look like nothing happened other than we've got a new faucet. Okay. So I've got this sitting here. I'm going to get this started. I'm going to leave it somewhat loose because we need to get the pedestal in there. Now, the bummer about this is now the task is to tighten this nut, and you can't hardly get in here. It's one thing I don't care for with these pedestal sinks. There might be a trick to this, and if somebody knows, leave me a comment, because this is kind of a pain. And I'm right-handed, so I'm gonna have to stuff myself in the corner. Okay, so what do we got going on here? So we've got this this nut that's got a couple of bolts in it, and the way this works is you're gonna run this down until you get it snug, and then we're gonna tighten these bolts, and that'll pull the nut away and push on this washer to really kind of tighten up the whole system. So to get it on there, you're gonna take this off. Okay, so we're unscrewing like so. Take this all the way off. One thing I like about this one, this is an Allen and Roth faucet. One thing I like about it is you can tell which one's hot and which one's cold. The one that I took off, and many of these I've replaced, they're the same color, so you kind of, it's not guessing, but it can be a little bit tricky when you're under there trying to figure it out. We're gonna take this washer and this rubber gasket off, and then this is gonna go on. And we've got just this ring here. I guess I should slow down and show. So we've just got this ring here. It's got an O-ring in it, and that's what's going to seal up against the sink, okay, or against this guy. So it's going to look just like that. And now this will go into our hole, and so that's kind of how it's going to look. So now we're going to take and put these on. So I've got the rubber washer and the steel ring. So the washer's going to go on first. Okay, and then we've got our nut. All right, so now I haven't tightened this. You can see it's still wobbling around. I'm just going to center things so that we're nice and straight. Okay, and now we can take our socket, and we can snug this up. I'm going to tighten a little bit on one side and tighten a little on the other side. That looks pretty good. What do you think? So we've got our sink back in place. We've got our faucet in. we've cleaned the silicone or the caulk, it's not silicone, off of the wall, and we've got our stop installed, retrofitted over to this new style. And now we just need to reconnect our water lines. These are longer than they need to be, which you're gonna find is pretty typical. So I'm gonna put a loop in them. I'm gonna hide most of it up inside of the pedestal. I've got a little crescent wrench here that I'm using. All right, let's do the hot water side. And I'm not tightening these down very tight. They also have a rubber washer, rubber O-ring inside of them. So at this point, we can turn the water back on. And here's where you really want to look closely, make sure you don't have any water leaks. We're going to turn them on slowly. So you can see we've got the twist in there, and that twist is hidden up inside of the pedestal. And I'm going to turn the water on. I'm going to do it just a little bit at a time. Let it charge. Okay. And I'm just running my hand, my finger around that connection. And as you can see, we have nothing. Okay. All right, so we're going to do the same thing to the other side. Okay, at this point, we can go ahead and turn the water on. Okay. So we obviously want to be under here. Whoops. You don't want to push on the sink too much until you get caulk on there. Really a combination of the caulk on the wall and this bracket and the pedestal that holds this thing together. And they all need to work in unison. So if you don't put caulk back on here, aside from getting water behind the sink here, which is obviously not a good thing, you're also not going to be very stable because it's just kind of sitting there, okay? So it's really, really important that you re-caulk along this seam and don't touch it for 24 hours and let it set up before you start using this, because otherwise it's one of the kids is going to come and hang on this or something and bad things can happen. So you just want to make sure you do that. Okay, so I'm just going to turn the water on, let it run, and I'm just feeling for leaks. Okay, that's working. That's good. There is one other thing that I meant to say earlier, and honestly, I spaced it, but once you get the trap, okay, the P-trap, set in place to where you're not going to take it back off again and you've snugged things up, pour water in it so that you can fill that lower portion with water, because that water in the trap is what's preventing sewer gases from coming into the house, okay? As soon as you take one of these apart, or if you've done it before, you know what I'm saying. It smells awful. It's not good for you, whatever else. So if you're delving into this, you want to shove a towel in there and get it blocked off so those gases aren't coming into the room where you're working. And then when you get it to the point where things are kind of more or less where they're going to be, pour a little bit of water in there and then you won't have to worry about it. All right, so what I've found that is going to work just fine is this white acrylic latex caulk. Okay, now I'm gonna wet my finger here a little bit, laying down a nice bead of caulk. It's really not that difficult. What I have found works best is try to lay it down really nice to begin with. And you can do that by cutting the tip correctly, so it's not too big for where you're applying. Oops, getting sealant all over the new faucet here. That's not good. But then also don't worry about it too much if it's not perfect, because you just come back and you just use your finger like I am, and there you go. we'll let this set up overnight, and this job will be done. Okay, well that was a little more involved, honestly, than I thought it was going to be. But you know what? So often that's the case, and that's that's the reason that that I do this and do it in the way that I am, is to show that you get into these projects and oftentimes it's not what you thought it was going to be. But you stick with it. Keep a cool head. Take a break if you need to, even come back to it the next day, or get some help or another opinion, and persevere. When you get done, make sure you check really, really good for leaks, but not just when you're done. Come back the following day and check again, and do that maybe another time after a week or something, just to make sure. I've seen where you get done installing a faucet and everything's fine, and then all of a sudden a couple of weeks down the road something's changed, something's shifted, and now you've got a leak. And if you don't go back and check, you may not know until you've got a serious problem. Water, as many of you probably know, is one of the most destructive things there is. It is just really, really bad on wood and so many other things, and if it's allowed to persist, it's going to cause a lot of damage. So take the time and double, triple check that you got everything tight like you should be. And if you've got a pedestal sink like this one, it's just kind of a pain. Again, if somebody's got a trick to tightening that one last nut, I'd love to hear it. So leave that comment in the comment section there. Otherwise, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask. As always, I'm happy to help. But this turned out pretty good, and it was kind of fun. So thank you again so much for watching Not So Basic Things. I hope you found this helpful. Take care of yourself.